Welcome to the Engrafted Word, with a mandate to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, making disciples of all men, teaching them to obey everything Jesus has commanded, preaching righteousness, holiness, and the pursuit of consecration, without which no man shall see the Lord. Presented by Engrafted Word Church. And now, Pastor Christopher McMichael.
All right, we have been teaching for quite a while, a few weeks now, on submission. Our bigger subject had been the basics, and this was kind of going to be the last message on the basics, you know, church attendance, Bible study, praise and worship, evangelism, all the basics, trying to get back to the basics of our faith. And that brought us to submission, and I thought that could be a one and done like the others, but I should have known better teaching on submission to Americans. It's like telling a teenager not to take a selfie. As Americans, we've pointed out several times that our national DNA is a foundation of rebellion. We would make the argument that there was a lot of good that came of those initial rebellions, whether it was the Protestant rebellion. I mean, that's the protesting against the Catholics. That gave way to the colonialization of the religious freedoms, where all of our pilgrim forefathers shook their fist at the Church of England and said, "You can't tell me how to worship God." We would support that, but there's still a rebellion there. Just like the Protestants and Martin Luther, the Reformation, they shook their fist at the Catholics and said, "You can't tell me how to worship God." And then after the colonial era, and we get into the American Revolution, and then our forefathers shook their fist at England once again and said, "You can't tell me how to live my life and how to tax me." And that was like a 2% tax. And I don't know, I'm taxed at like 30%. I don't know how y'all are doing, but maybe, I don't know, what's our tax rate, 20? It's too much. But anyway, so I don't have any tea to throw in the harbor. I wish I did, but I do want to find a politician or two and tar and feather them. It just feels like that should be an Olympic sport. So that would be a good one. I would gold medal in that. When we talk about submission, the Bible commands us to submit to all those that are in authority. Romans 13, as we have been covering, Romans 13 declares that all authority is ordained of God, and those that resist the ordinances of God. We use the principle, the allegory that authority is like a river, and we have multiple rivers of authority in our lives. If you're at the university, you're submitting to the dean of your department, or you're submitting to the president, depending on what your job is here at Tennessee Tech. If you're a student, you're submitted to a professor, maybe to an advisor. You're submitted to their authority. If you're on a sports team, you're submitted to the authority of the coach or the athletic director or whatever, your defense, offense, special teams. You have a coordinator you submit to. In the local church, you submit to the pastor and the elders. On the streets, you submit to the police and the traffic laws. If you're in a home, you submit to the head of the home. If it's a single parent, that's who they are. If it's a father, that's who it should be. We understand this because it's the nature of all culture. All culture. This is so intuitive, so ingrained in creation. All culture works this way. Even if you're a Hindu living in India, in Bangalore, you're still submitting to the priest at the temple. You're still submitting to the police. You're still submitting to your mother and your father. You're still submitting to the teacher. Even the pagan nations and their pagan religions operate in the same rules because that's how innate and how ordained it is of God. It took a Christian nation like ours to really pioneer rebellion in every direction. I'm not going to go to that church. I'm going to go to any church in town. We have people in this church, this town, that I think they're trying to punch every church in town off a card because they're a church floozy. They just hop from church to church to church because they get offended so easily, don't want to submit, can't be told what to do, and it's evident. And then you've got folks also in this town, but we're not just picking on our town. They'll have 5 jobs in a year because they can't be told what to do. I mean, you pay me enough, I'll do anything you tell me what to do as long as it's legal. I don't care if it's shoveling manure, climbing a high power line, whatever. You pay me enough, I'll do it. I don't know why people can't just do what they're told for a paycheck, considering it's a lawful and fair, honest wage and work. So we have to deal with this. And even in our hearts, if we don't consecrate to the Lord, we're going to be submitted to the leadership in our lives. Offense will come, we'll get offended, we'll listen to a familiar spirit, and then we'll get out of that river of authority. And a few weeks ago, we had we had a kind of an altar call for if your life feels like you're just flopping, going nowhere, and we use the example that maybe you're like a fish, that you're supposed to be swimming upstream in that river of authority, but you decided, I don't want to, and your little kick of rebellion threw you on the bank, and you're gasping for air because you can't get anywhere you're at. And we said it's probably because you've rebelled against the authority, some avenue, some vein, some river in your life, and now you're struggling. We had a couple folks respond to that. The only way to get authority legally, lawfully, is to submit to it. And all of these avenues or rivers of authority in our life are ordained of God to teach us something. And by submitting it into it, we go higher in life. We submit to the police, we go higher in life. We submit to the professor, we go higher in the classroom. We submit to the boss, we go higher on the job. We submit to the local church, we go higher in the kingdom. It's pretty simple. Can leadership take advantage and exploit it? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a temptation because the person in the seat of authority is a man or a woman with a sin nature and a demon realm that never stops. So absolutely, a professor can become a tyrant. And a police officer can become corrupt. And a pastor can become a cult leader. And a father can become abusive. And a mother can become a Jezebel. Yeah, every category. There isn't a single category that has not become corrupted through the sin nature, ego, selfishness, etc., that doesn't undermine the seat of authority. How corrupt were the Pharisees? Incredibly. Jesus Christ said, do what they tell you to do, but don't do as they do, for they sit in the seat of Moses. He didn't want them to be anything like the Pharisees, but he said, do what they tell you to do. Go show the offering of Moses as a testimony for them. They sit in the seat of Moses. That's the seat of authority. So we have to be able to find this nuance, this subtlety where my boss can be a jerk and a tyrant, but I can still earn a paycheck from him. And he got to be a boss some way or another, so there's some good that can be extracted from him if we can focus on the avenue God has us in the moment. For many Westerners, especially modernists, we're so distracted, we're not even fully on the job when we're on the job. So all we pay attention to is being chewed out. And we're not really in the classroom when we're supposed to be in the classroom, so we only pay attention when we're being mistreated. And I think the distractions keep us from focusing on all the good, so that the only thing we pay attention to is the slight bit of discomfort from a butt chewing, pardon my language, or a tongue lashing or a punishment. We don't pay attention to everything else that God was trying to put into us. Maybe in the local church, because when you're here, you're not fully here. You only hear the thing that offends you, which I think makes you a carnal moron. How's that for offense? Did that wake you up? Are you paying attention now? Pastor Vaughn used to say, he said, you know what? You guys will get offended over one thing I said and leave, but you won't stay for the 1,000 things I taught you that changed your life. And that's the problem every pastor faces. Every boss faces that too. Every boss has to contend with the employee who he thinks twice about asking him to do something because he knows he's going to give him lip, an excuse, and it's going to be done halfway when it finally gets done. That boss also just put that guy on the first person to fire when the work dries up. You don't want to be the person your leadership has to think twice about or is even reluctant to come to because of attitude, because you're half-hearted in your performance, or because you're insubordinate. Our job is to submit to all these avenues of authority God has ordained for our life and ask the Lord, what am I supposed to get out of this? What am I supposed to get from this professor? I know they're not a believer, but I can get something from them. How can I honor them? You're supposed to honor all those that are in authority. Did you know if you honor authority, some will be given to you? Just run your professor down and see how that goes for you. Or you can honor your professor and see how that goes for you. I had professors that didn't like me because I was a geology major and I was a Christian and I was an outspoken Christian, and it just bugged them. Ironically, we had several professors that were Christians. They're all retired now. But there's two guys who were outspoken. They're all retired now too. There were two guys that were outspokenly pagans, and they somewhat persecuted me because I was a believer. I got called out in class a lot, but in the end, they were still fair. And all these years later, I still talk to them in town. In fact, one of them, this is a professor that blackballed me, so I didn't get into grad school, which was honestly probably the hand of God because I wasn't supposed to go. He blackballed me because all my GRE scores were top notch and I had 5 years of experience in geotechnical engineering. I should have been able to get into grad school, no problem. When UT turns you down, something's wrong. UT doesn't just fail at football, they fail at a lot of stuff. So I was going to go to grad school at UT because it was I was working downtown in Knoxville. Anyway, I knew it was the professor because he didn't like me. But it wasn't too long ago, probably 5 years ago, I ran into him at the hospital because his wife had nearly died. And I said, "Sir," he said, "Chris," when he remembers you 25 years later, you made an impact. "Sir, Chris." And he knows I'm a pastor now. I said, "What are you doing up here?" He said, "Well, my wife," and explained the situation. I said, "Oh." And he said, "Would you mind to go pray for her?" He said it would really mean a lot to her. I said, "Absolutely." So I went there and spent about an hour with his wife and his 2 grown daughters talking about the things of God. And, I could have hated him, but I was 20 years later excited to see him and excited as what can I do to help you? I didn't get to grad school, but still graduated, still had a great degree in geology. We have to really mind our attitude. The spirit on this nation wants you to hate anybody in charge for the simple sake that it will destroy your life when you hate everybody in charge. And if you'll submit to authority, you'll one day be in charge and you'll understand why it's hard at the top. And anyway, we want to submit to those that are in authority. One of the things we said that you need to be working on is make sure you can pinpoint all the leadership in your life. Because if you can go into a room or a setting or an area of life and recognize who's in charge, who calls the shots here, and then to figure out how to begin, number 1, to pray for them, and number 2, how to help them, it will expedite promotion in your life. Some people who are rebellious, insecure, coward, and I don't mean that last term negatively, I just mean you're just fearful, you'll automatically avoid leadership everywhere you go. And if you're always avoiding leadership, you can never be promoted. But you ought to, as a rule of thumb, go into a place of leadership, a classroom, and make yourself known. Make yourself known to the police, make yourself known to the professor, the boss, the manager, and just get around them and see what you can do to help them, because if you can help leadership in your life, it will bring you up higher. Sometimes we compete to be last place, and I don't know why we choose to do that. Why are you competing to be last place? Why do you want to be the very bottom of the barrel when you don't have to be, except for maybe you don't want the responsibility? Anyway, we've been saying a lot about leadership and submission, and I'm mindful, been very heavy-handed one direction, which is basically submit, 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 submit. But that being said, we probably need to come back and say, what if this situation? What if that situation? So I had some questions sent to me, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to deal with the easier one first, then we'll go on and we're going to talk about Abigail, because she, in a sense, seems to have undermined her husband, Nabaal. We want to discuss, when can a wife undermine her husband? This person is not asking because they want to be. In fact, they even say, "I want to be a submitted woman." If you're looking for opportunity, your heart's probably not right. Because I'm not going to give you legal permission from the Bible to undermine your husband. We're going to look at the conditions that Abigail was facing. But here's this question. We dealt with this 4 or 5 years ago at the height of COVID. They ask, in light of submitting to government, what do you do when there are certain overreaches of power that perhaps goes against the Constitution and perhaps put your health on the line? Do you submit to wearing masks, getting required vaccines, shutting down your non-essential business, etc.? Now, we've all lived through this. Those of you that are maybe younger, you just, mom and dad were probably protecting you, didn't know a lot of it. So my rule of thumb is this: I'm heavily vaccinated for travel because I'm in and out of countries a lot. I am all for proven vaccines, non-experimental vaccines. I'm all for vaccines that aren't based on fetal stem cells. I'm all for vaccines that are not tested on babies or, anything in that regard, or used stem cells or aborted babies to research, which a lot of them do. In fact, a lot of the COVID vaccines were, and it just wasn't a proven vaccine. I did not get the vaccine, not the COVID. Now, again, my yellow document from health department has about 20 things filled in. That's a lot of vaccines. If I were to ever have chelation or any kind of blood therapy, it would probably knock out all my vaccines, and I'd have to line back up at the health department and be shot again with lots of shots. But that being said, I did not get the COVID vaccine because I already had myocarditis once, and I almost died of cardiovascular failure because of inflammation in my heart. And I don't want to knock any of you that got the vaccine. If you were sensitive to the Holy Spirit and not flying your antenna in the face of fear and fear of losing your job, you would have not gotten the vaccine. I knew by the Spirit of God, most of my friends said, I don't feel good about this. I don't feel good about this. I'm not doing this. Now, for me, I didn't risk losing a job because this is my job, but that would have been something worth losing your job over. Even a lot of folks are now suing the government and the military. They discharge a lot of Navy SEALs who refused on religious grounds to get the vaccine. There is a place where you do rebel. We call that civil disobedience. Now, here's the thing with civil disobedience. It isn't burning a city down like the woke-tard BLM movement. That's not civil disobedience. That's anarchy. Civil disobedience is what the civil rights movement did, and if you study what they said, they were prepared to go to jail. In fact, I watched a documentary one time, and what blessed me so much about the civil rights movement was that it was church-led, peacefully, and I was watching a woman who was a child then. They were ready to go to jail as children, and they were jailed as children, and we were taught, she said we were taught Bible lessons we'd go through and songs we'd sing in the jail cells. That's civil disobedience. We're going to march, and they're going to arrest us. And we're ready to pay the price for our disobedience. We're not going to be mad about it. We expect it. So if you were to rebel against the COVID shot mandates, then you just be prepared to pay the price. And when your conviction's strong enough, you will pay the price. That's all right. I knew people that were fired. There were people that were let go. I was asked to write a few letters. I didn't have to write too many letters of religious exemption. Our state, thankfully, being a conservative state, our governor was pretty chill on all of it because he understood not to trust government because he wasn't a politician. He was a business owner. And he told us pastors on a Zoom call, we don't know what we're dealing with here, so we're going to ask you to please close your churches down. If the churches closures had gone long, like in Seattle, like our friend Pastor Kerchunas out there in Auburn, he said after a while, they just started having church regardless. And we understand that because we all lived through the hypocrisy of COVID. You couldn't go to church, but you could go to strip clubs. You couldn't go to church, but you could go to bars. You couldn't go to church, but you could go protest and burn down Seattle. So what Kerchunas did is he posted out there, and I loved it. He said, come to church tonight. We're having church. He blasted it on Facebook. We're coming to church. We're going to protest sin, so bring a brick. It was a protest. We're going to protest sin, and they had church. And he also had to face scrutiny. He was called every week by this lady he got to know. Remember when they were doing the whole contact tracing, where somebody named Sally who took a 2-hour online class could then come ask you your health record, even though that violates HIPAA laws? You remember when our nation went retarded? Remember those years? That would have been a good time for civil disobedience. We were protected by it here pretty much in the state of Tennessee, and I'm thankful for it. And especially in Putnam County, our sheriff said, I ain't enforcing nothing. God bless the sheriff. But there is a place. But my general rule of thumb is that if you're going to be civilly disobedient, you have to be prepared for the ramifications. If you're anti-war, you can be a conscientious objector, but be prepared to go to jail for a year or two. You just have to be prepared. Don't be upset when they arrest you. If your convictions are strong enough, just like Peter and John, we're going to preach. And the Pharisees said, don't you do it. And they did it, and they got tortured for it, and they accepted the consequences. They did not obey the rule of the law for the name of God. They said we ought to obey God rather than man. There is a place for civil disobedience. What is interesting for me, looking back now, post-COVID, is that first 2 months of COVID, we were all kind of locked down. So one of the things we did here at the church was we did a series called Questions and Answers from Quarantine. So every day for 50 days, we would record them a bunch at a time for time's sake. We do Q&A. Some of those videos are 10 minutes, some of them are 25 or 30 minutes, but it was something we could just put out there. And we answered any kind of theological question. But it was funny because kind of like halfway back into those questions, we started getting antsy, and somebody emailed me about what about civil disobedience? When is enough enough? So I answered a question on civil disobedience. I quoted Martin Luther King heavily, and I said, listen, we don't want to protest. We don't want to burn anything down. We're going to submit to the government for now. They don't know what they're doing. We're trying to figure this thing out. And I said there is a place for civil disobedience, but I didn't call for anything major. That video got taken down. How many times did it get taken down? I don't think it's up there even right now. We have 49 videos up. That one gets taken down. And all I said was Martin Luther King. Now, the irony is that's May. The next month, we start burning cities down, and the government's excited about it, and YouTube's blasting it. That's the hypocrisy. That's the spirit of the world promoting sin. So, if it violates the Constitution, even the military swears an oath to defend the Constitution. We can remove presidents and we can remove captains of sea ships and platoon commanders if they start violating codes. But those guys who do it have to be prepared to be court-martialed and to go on trial. In that moment, you take a gun, you hold it to your lieutenant's head, and you say, "I'm relieving you of duty." And he says, "All right, but you know what this is going to mean for you?" "I do, but I think you're going to get the rest of us killed. I'd rather go to court than die today." They're willing to take the fall. That's the rule behind civil disobedience. There is a place where you disobey when it violates God's word, but there will be consequences, and that will also prove your commitment to Christ. All right, let's keep reading this question. Do you submit to wearing masks? If you want what they're offering, yes. I flew 4 or 5 times the first year of COVID. It was wonderful. The airports were ghost towns and the airplanes were empty. And they still made us wear a mask. Did you wear a mask? Yes. Why? Because I wanted to fly. Now, what was funny is I could take it off to chew. I could take it off to drink. I could take it off when they served me peanuts. But when I was done chewing or drinking, I had to put the mask back on. Because apparently food can't go in your mouth and COVID come out your nose at the same time. I'm telling you, for like those 2 years, we went in completely anti-science. We can't mock that season in our nation's history enough. We could mock it every day for 1,000 years, and that still wouldn't be enough. I wasn't here when you guys had the COVID shutdown, but it seems to me like there needs to be a line in which you will not bow to whatever their wishes were. Yes. Now, we didn't have that issue here. We opened up on Mother's Day. We went back and hit full steam pretty quickly, so we were only down for about 6 weeks, honoring our governor's request, not his command. But churches on the West Coast, and I had pastor friends in several places in California and in Oregon and in Seattle, they had to meet underground. They were meeting at different times of day and at different homes, and they'd come in at different times, almost like communist Russia or communist Germany. And in fact, one of my friends, Pastor Darren, was at a conference in Idaho, the free state of Idaho. They could have conferences there, but you cross over into Washington state, you couldn't, because states' rights. And one of the old fathers of the faith looked at this group of 100 or 150 pastors who'd come, because a lot of them were locked down in California, and that old man of God said, "Shame on you for denying Christ to honor your government. Shame on you. The ecclesia is called out together. You better go home and figure out how you're going to obey the head of the church, or you don't deserve that congregation. Shame on you. You go back there. You're called to meet together. We don't bend to Newsom. We don't bend to whoever that woman was over Oregon at the time. We're not bending. You're going to go back to your churches, or so help me God, I will pray you out of your pulpit." And they learn how to have underground churches real quick. Yeah, civil disobedience. Now, if they get caught, they got to be willing to pay the fine. Now, there were some guys like John MacArthur. I'm not a big John MacArthur fan, but I appreciate his stand on righteousness. He told California, no. And they fined him, and he sued them back. And they're all winning their lawsuits against the state of California now. Good for them. John MacArthur, we were destined not to shut down. He's a predestination guy. We're Calvinists. We were destined to sue you. We were destined to win. We're destined to not shut down. Yeah. I honestly feel we are in a lot of mess we're in because the church did not stand up and hasn't been for years. We haven't been bothered to be involved on school boards, politics, business, etc. The people that have now said enough is enough are considered the rebels. I agree with that. The peacemakers can't understand why people don't just do as we're told. Yeah, that's part of the issue. Then this individual, she quotes the famous line about the Holocaust trains passing through German neighborhoods and people just singing louder so they wouldn't have to listen to the cries of the Jews being carted off to the gas chambers and the incineration centers. Yeah, I'm all for it. There's a time when we rebel. There's a time when you look at your husband, who is the head of your home, and you say, "Honey, I love you, but you're dead wrong. You're going to hurt us." There's a time, my wife teaches our children here in the Sunday school, your dad drives the bus. You need to pray for the bus driver. But if I'm on a public bus and the bus driver has a seizure or goes into a diabetic coma, I'm jumping up, I'm grabbing him, I'm going to try to pull him out of the way and pull this bus over to safety. We really see it with Joab in the story of David when he wants to go take a census of the people in the end of Samuel and Second Chronicles, First Chronicles. Joab knows that what David wants to do is wrong. The only reason you take a census of Israel is when you want to collect the tax. Well, they don't need the money. So the motive for David taking a census of the troops is to boast. And Joab knows the law of Moses. It's a Mosaic thing. And Joab says, King, this thing you're asking me to do, because Joab's the one to do it, is not good. Right. What you're asking is not right. And he says, may God make the armies of Israel 1,000 times bigger than they are. So it's not about raising a money census or a tax. That's the only reason, according to Moses' law, the only reason you take a census is to raise a tax for the people, for the nation. David wasn't interested in money. He just wanted to know how big his army had gotten. Joab says, who cares? We're unstoppable. This thing is not good. And it says, and nevertheless, the word of David prevailed against Joab. So Joab goes to obey. And it's a several-month process, and he quits halfway through it. I'm not doing this. This isn't God. And he disobeys the king, which would have been death sentence, except God shows up to kill David. So there is a place where you politely decline, and you politely say, I can't do this. And you become a civilly disobedient, maybe a conscientious objector to whatever the sinful commandment is, but you have to be willing to take the price.
Thank you for joining us today. We trust that the preaching has been a delight and blessing to your soul. Be sure to join us every Sunday and every Wednesday at 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. for the preaching of God's Word. For more information, contact our website at www.engraftedword.org.